Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, October 1st, officially in October 2025, and today we are live talking all things gardening and life and soccer, hopefully, and whatever else you all have questions about. So let's do it. All right, welcome to October, everyone. I never 100% know if if the song is actually going to work, so I hope that actually goes through for you all. We are live, and so I'm going to allow some time for some folks to trickle in and get your questions in. Mike is in the chat, so you can address your questions to him. He will send them over to me so that I can answer them in a good order. And so I'm always excited to go live. I think this is like one of the more fun things we do every month, and I get to answer a lot of different questions, kind of rapid fire some stuff, maybe follow up on stuff that I forget to follow up on. And also, while we're letting people sort of trickle in, we're going to go ahead and get our live ad read out of the way for Farmhand. Renewal season is here, and the work you put in now is what brings members back. Sorry, Ari. Is what brings members back next year. Ari Mimar, founder of Farmhand and a guest you've heard on this podcast, has worked with regenerative farmers to create a playbook that turns renewal season into a growth season. One farmer, Melanie at Shake Fork Community Farm, brought in $40,000 in renewals in just 2 weeks using this strategy. Now, Ari and Melanie are sharing the exact approach in a free live workshop and downloadable playbook. Watch on demand and get the playbook at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. Again, as you trickle in, make sure to get your farming or whatever questions you have to in the chat for Mike to send to me, and he will get those over to me. And also, I want to shout out Real Farmer Care for we've worked with Clara Coleman for years now. We helped her to start her amazing podcast, the Winter Growers Podcast, and then she also started Real Farmer Care. So if you want to help some farmers out, that is a really great way to do that. We will put a link for that in the show notes or maybe in the chat if Mike wants to do that as well. You can learn more about what she's doing. She's just amazing at helping farmers kind of get a little bit of a break, and I think that's really important. And again, don't forget as you trickle in to get your questions into Mike. And this show is officially, like I said yesterday, we're 1 year in. We're over 1 year in now that we're in October. We started on the 30th of September last year. And you will remember that was like one of the first days we saw, the damage coming in from Hurricane Helene. And that was just devastating. And I talked just that whole week and maybe the next week, we kind of spent talking about like how the effects of that on Asheville, on that, driving, on just getting in and out of North Carolina on the western side, and just devastating. Like I had so many farmer friends there that lost, topsoil, that lost animals, that lost their farms. And we drove through there, it would have been December because we were headed over to South Carolina for Christmas. And, we had to go the back roads around, the mountains there because all those mountain roads had been washed out. And even going the back way, to get west there or to get east from through western North Carolina, it was just wild. Like you could still see the devastation in December, and I'm sure it's still visible today down there. And so I'm just hoping all those folks have been able to recover. And it was a wild thing to start the show with, but that was always kind of my vision for it, I guess, is to talk about things that directly affect farmers. I know there have been a lot of wildfires, a lot of flooding this year, a lot of droughts. It's hard to even cover it all just because there's so many disasters like that in any given year. But this year felt like it was particularly intense. And let me see. Let me check over here with Mike. Looks like we have some good questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in on those. Let's see. McKenna and Andrew Fox. And this is fun because when I do these, I'm often literally just learning what the question is as I read it. How do we combat hornworms and other tomatoes or pests or other tomato pests? Okay, so hornworms, the biggest thing, I actually just saw one the other day that was parasitized, but the biggest thing with hornworms, the easiest way to do it, there's two options really. There's a BT option if you want like a spray, like an immediate spray option. I do think there's a BT option, Bacillus thuringiensis option for hornworms. But for me, it's just making sure that you have lots of small flowers, in particular the Sweet Alyssum flowers, the one that we use a lot. You can grow it in pots or you can grow it right in the ground. And that's one that brings in the parasitic wasp that parasitizes the hornworms. And you'd be amazed at how effective that is. Like we get some defoliation here or there on our tomatoes, on our cherry tomatoes in the tunnel especially. But you know those parasitic wasps, they lay their eggs all through the hornworm, and that those little white bumps on them, and then those hatch out and they basically consume the caterpillar, and that's really effective. Like I would say I saw 3 of those the other day that had been parasitized, and they get a little bit, they defoliate for a little bit, and then after that they just, they get parasitized, and then that breeds more of those parasitic wasps. So you kind of want to leave them. I remember I had a friend, one of our mentor was telling me a story of like going to another farm, and this was a conventional farmer, and they saw one of those hornworms and it had all those parasitic wasps over it, and it picked it up and it smashed it on the ground. And he was like, yeah, we got to get rid of those. Those are eggs for the hornworm. And it's not. Those are not the hornworm's eggs. Those are the parasitic wasp eggs. So anyway, flowers. Yeah, umbelliflora, like any of the dill family sort of flowers. The cilantro, any of those smaller sort of, Sweet Alyssum is a great one. Just a mix of those will help bring in a lot of those pests. And then in the field, having some place for birds to perch. I mean, having a trellis helps. They'll just perch right there. But I've seen birds just kind of sit there and pick off the hornworms, one after the other. A lot of people will go in at night to their tunnels too with like a black light, and you can see them. So I've never done that. I've never had to, I guess. But that's also an option if they're really hammering you. The harder one I think is like army worms. We get those sometimes in the summer. And, we can pick them off when we see their defoliate, like when you see the poop or the defoliation, like you'll see the little droppings on the leaves or on the fruit. And then you can pick those off, but those are a little bit harder, but there is also a BT option for that if you want to go that route. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, that's kind of what we do. It's a great question though. I think that's a good one to prepare for next season, figuring out how you're going to get those flowers and wherever you're growing. Gert Himmelings, that's fun, Gert. Not sure if I'm saying that right. How hard is it to move a farm across the continent, considering there will be some capital to fall back on and all the tools available in greenhouses, but no market developed, no soil developed? How hard is it to move a farm across the continent? It's hard to move a farm across the county. So we did... It's not impossible, but like we moved our farm, Mike just moved his farm across the country. He'd probably be able to answer this better than I would. But for me, like we've moved farms several times, but it's always just been within the state. And so, like for us, we've, it's a lot to move all that equipment, and especially like if you want to take your tunnels down and stuff. For me, those bigger things are just kind of, we leave those. Those are sold. Those got sold with our last farm. We left 3 tunnels on that property. We didn't like try and take down the barns or anything like that. Like we just left all that. It was part of the property. And then, all the small equipment. If you think you're going to move, try and keep stuff as mobile as possible. And it may be worth just selling and rebuying for a lot of that stuff. I mean, maybe not a BCS. You can get that kind of, they can pack in pretty well to like a trailer. But once you get starting, like just like tarps and row cover and all this stuff, it just adds up. It just creates so much mass. It takes up so much space. It's really hard to consolidate some of those things. Hand tools, that's not too hard, but it's some of that like bulkier stuff, tarps, row cover, those, insect netting. Those were the things that took the most amount of time for us to move. We also had, you'll remember if you watch some of the older videos, we used to have barrels of water. I think they were like 40, 50 gallon barrels. But anyway, we had these big barrels of water and we had to dump all of those out. And I was talking about this recently when we were talking about the Black Widows. And anyway, we dumped all those out and then we had to move them. But that took like I don't know, 3 trips just on its own on a trailer in the back of our truck, moving all those barrels because they take up a lot of space, even though they're empty. So, some of that bulkier stuff, it's probably going to be a lot easier to just leave that and then pack up what you can. I don't know, row covers, the landscape fabric, anything that you're using like that, you probably just want to sell it or, give it to a nonprofit farm or something and just kind of, and then rebuy some of that stuff, unfortunately. But yeah, and then obviously you can't take your soil with you, so that's never the best. Let's see, what do we got here? Jesse Mears writes, when did you know you need to hire? When do you know? There's a loud truck outside. When did you know you need to hire farm labor? I'm doing a good job here. I'm going to take a drink of water. Let's try it a third time, Jesse. When did you know you need to hire labor for the farm? So, when did we know? I guess it depends. It's kind of not a decision. It really starts when you have revenue enough that it's sustaining your farm, and then you see more opportunity for more, I think is when you really start thinking about those things. And then in order to start, if I grew more and I saved myself more time in these areas, especially in the areas that add value, like washing and packing and planting and harvesting, if you know that for sure, and you can, that would be the time that you would start to hire somebody. But you want to also at that same time make sure that you have enough money in the bank that you could cover that person for at least a few months, right? So that's one of the more stressful things is I think the first time we started hiring people, we had enough to cover them for the month, but then we were just like, well, it's got to work. And that's not really fair to them, and that's not really fair to you, because if it doesn't work, or if it's slow, or like you have a crop failure that's really important to you, then you're in a situation where you aren't able to cover them, and it becomes really stressful, and you're taking money away from your farm or yourself or whatever, you're borrowing or whatever to get through. And so for me, I think when you're looking at like a lot of opportunities that are not getting, that you're not able to do on your own. And then when you have the funds to cover them. Because like I said, you do not want to get yourself in a situation where you're gambling. You're not going to be like, all right, well, I'll just try because I know there's this market here and then I'm sure it'll bring in money. Like for me, it's have that money first just to take that stress off in case it doesn't work. I don't know. That's probably where I would go with that question. Steve Bowman asks, have the ag zones changed in the States? Here in Ontario, new zone maps came out, and due to global warming, I have increased one full zone. They did change in the United States. Now, my understanding is it's not entirely based on how the weather has changed. That is a thing. Like it is, we're getting hotter summers and all those things. The ag zones also, or at least, according to the USDA, changed because the accuracy of the measurements, I think. I read a whole thing about it at some point, but it has something to do with just like they're more accurate now than when they originally adapted those zones. So it may be different for Canada. I don't know. Just the ag zones in the United States, that's how it went. But yeah, I mean, like we are getting, it's going to be like 90 degrees again this weekend and just nonstop this summer. And it's been every year breaks the heat record from the previous year. So like we're getting to the point when those things are, that's just the reality that we're living in. But yeah, they did change ours. We went from, we were in 6B and now we're a 6B 7A cusper. Like we were fully in 6B and now we're like, it's literally like goes up and down our street from the last change. So, so we're right on the cusp there. And I think because we're a little bit up on a hill, that I think we're closer to that 7B, but I don't know. But it is something to check up on. If for the last 10 years you've been saying you're in X zone, it may be worth double checking to make sure that's actually accurate. Indica Dogo writes, "Hey Jesse, have you heard of the new soil redux sensor from Sensen? I have not. I have not heard of that. I can look into it. It sounds interesting. And then." Yeah, sorry, Indica. Some of these, like, I don't know, people send me stuff all the time. They'll send me this or that new gadget or this or that new, they'll at least ask me if I want to try it or this or that new amendment. And I just 9 times out of 10 in 5 years, we've all forgotten about them. So I'm really hesitant about some of these things. Once I see farmers using it and having success with it, and I'll try some of it myself, but I try not to just start them and then start talking about them because then people assume it's functional. I'd rather see it functioning out in the real world and then and then talk about it, even if I've tried it already. So I try and be cautious about what I'm promoting and what I'm talking about, just because it's, we have such a platform that I don't want to get people buying, this or that new gadget, and then they find out, well, this thing doesn't work, or it's not that helpful or whatever. And yeah, I mean, that's just the nature of these things. But for some of you, I assume because your name here, that you probably are, growing some amount of cannabis or something. And that's, they really, really dial in production with cannabis production, not cannibal production. But so that some of those things really make a difference. Like just a few ounces here or there are hugely important. Whereas for us, like a few ounces of beets out in the field is like, unnoticeable for the most part. But important, but hard for us to really, really dial it in when we're growing in, outdoors and all those things. So anyway, I don't know if that's an answer to the question, but it certainly sparked that thought. Appreciate that. Reese Foster asks, any experience growing alfalfa? Thinking of trying to grow some for my cow. Also, happy birthday from Ontario. It's not my birthday. The show's birthday. My birthday is soon, though. That's so you're a little ahead of the game here, Reese. But it is the show's birthday, so that's much appreciated. Growing alfalfa? No, I've never grown it myself. There are a few people around that grow sort of like the Roundup Ready alfalfa here in Kentucky, but no, I've never grown it myself. Perennial legume that you want to get a couple good cuttings off of for your garden or something. I've always wanted to. Like I've always been like, if I had an alfalfa hay supply for my mulching my tomatoes and mulching my garlic and stuff, that would be the jam. So I'm all for it. But no, I don't have a lot of experience with it. I'd like to try. I'd like to get some. I'd love to have a bed of it just to kind of know. So maybe in the future, Reese, I think that's a cool idea. Jay Hani Crash, sort of like Johnny Cash. I really want to read it that way, but it's clearly not intended to be. Let's see. Have a garden allotment where I'm planning on planting 8 different fruit trees. Keep them small and harvest about 20 pieces of fruit per tree. What would be the best approach? I guess it depends on the fruit tree, and you want to keep them small and harvest about 20 pieces of fruit. I mean, that's a lot. That's not a lot of fruit, right? Like that's a pretty small amount. So, I mean, I think picking the right fruit for where you are is the best place to start. And when you're trying to keep them small, it's all about pruning. So you really, really want to study up on how to prune those trees to keep them small. And you also want, to get the dwarf rootstock or the double dwarf rootstock or whatever it is that you're trying to grow, pears, apples, whatever, to keep them small. Yeah, I mean, your pruning is going to be the biggest factor in that, is how you prune those trees, and then also, like I said, what you choose. Depending on if you're trying to interplant them with a garden, like within a garden, that will also have an effect on how far apart you space them. And there's also, if you really, really want small trees, like you could look at some of the intensive apple production and that sort of thing, depending on what fruits you're planting, where they keep those trees really, really small, really, really tight, very closely spaced, and they're just like in a line. But that's an intensive way of producing. So it's kind of a different thing. But it's worth looking into. I mean, maybe there's something there where you could keep them really small and really tight and, harvest a decent amount of fruit from them, but you won't get as many years out of them. So that's just, some things to think about. Good question. Local Color Farm asks, can you talk about the Sumi Soaker and ways that you have used it this season? Yeah. I started experimenting with it, in August, maybe? Diego Footer sent it to me from moderngrower.co. And I've been wanting to experiment with it again. I'm like hesitant to jump into these things too quickly, but this one right off the bat, I could see the utility. And it is, so far, there's some things that I love about it. There's some limitations, like all tools. The things that I love about it is it gets great coverage. I can imagine this being, and I had somebody write me recently about it, being good for carrot germination in the summer, for instance, or, any sort of germination, but any sort of misting for lettuces. We used it for misting several times. It works great for that. Some of the, and it's pretty mobile, I think. And they also make these reels I hope to experiment with in this next year. I want to try a few different reels, and I want to try some makeshift reel ideas I have, if I can get the budget for it. And then, try and experiment with using that maybe on some timers and just see how that sort of works out. And if there's any way to really make it effective. And there's another thing is that when you're using that Sumi soaker, basically you're laying like it flat against the ground. And for people who don't know what this is, it's an irrigation system that is, it basically like if you poked holes in your drip tape and it spits out, that's kind of what this is, but intentional. So basically it sprays out of these little holes on this like flat, almost like a lay flat. And it, when it goes kind of, there's a couple that go up and a few that go out. So it sprays pretty well, pretty wide. I think the longer or the wider one gets something like 30 feet. So you can go, irrigate several beds in either direction. And one of the downsides of that though, is it's a little bit hard on a slope. It drains pretty slowly. So you kind of need an easy way of draining it out. And some of the reels have ways of like pushing the water out. Also, if it's underneath of a crop, like so if it's spraying from the ground, right, it looks like it lays flat against the ground. So if it's spraying from the ground, anything that's above it has a problem because the spray's just going to hit the bottom of like kale or whatever else is right there, right? So it's harder to water taller stuff. They do make some risers, which I'm interested in experimenting with too, where you can either put just the riser directly in the ground, or you can put it in like conduit, like metal conduit pieces, and then stand it up a little bit higher, and then you stretch that taut against the top, so you can basically stand up the Sumi soaker. The problem with that, though, is what's the difference between that and just using sprinklers at that point? Because if you're having to put one of those every 5 or 6 feet, it's basically the same thing as using sprinklers. So I think the risers are probably not going to make sense. I am going to try and experiment with them, but like I think at that point you just have to sub in your sprinkler. So it's not a replace all, but it's really, really good for certain things. And then obviously for things like tomatoes, you can't get your leaves all wet all the time. So you really still need to have some drip tape option. A tool in the toolbox, like all tools, right? There is no such thing as a perfect tool, but there is such thing as a perfect toolbox. So that's where you kind of have to think about, like how you're going to use it. Would it be right for you? If you're doing a lot of direct seeding, I think definitely. If you're doing a lot of misting, I think definitely. If you are doing a lot of tall crops, probably not. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of where I fall on it for right now. But I'm going to try, like I said, I'm going to try some of those reels. I'd like to try some timers and just see how, all those things kind of fit together. All right. Yeah. Great question though so Susanna Stupar asks, is there a big, I don't know why I said Stupar like that. Sorry. Is there a big difference in cover cropping and planting edible winter crops? Obviously at some point of the winter, we will eat the crop, but I guess is still better than bare soil. Small garden. Thanks. I think. So yeah, there's no problem necessarily with just using crops to cover crop. There are some values to the garden that cover crops bring that crops can't necessarily. Maybe it's like a legume bringing nitrogen, or a grain bringing the mulching effect. But there are beds every year that we'll plant to spinach, and then we'll just harvest that all winter, and it just kind of stays there like a crop, and there's nothing wrong with that. Or like, green garlic is another one. We'll plant some green garlic, and then we'll just harvest that as we need it. And this, especially in the early spring, like come March, we have these nice thick, green garlics that we can pull out, chop up the greens. It's really nice to add those to stir fries and stuff. On the legume side, I think your only option is kind of like, a thick mat of peas. Like if you lay down a thick bed of peas, you can cut those for pea shoots, and then just let that grow, and then it will die in the wintertime, theory, if you plant it, early enough. And then it would die in the winter, or over the winter, and then you'd have a nice mat. It wouldn't be as much of a mulch, but it would, have added a little bit of nitrogen and that sort of thing. Plenty of roots and all the good things that you want from your cover crops. Mosh is another one that you could use over winter, because it's just, it is hardy as all get out. That stuff will survive everything. And but the problem with mosh is that it's a one cut, like it's not a cut and come again. Somebody needs to develop a cut and come again mosh. But basically you essentially just harvest the whole thing, and then you don't have any crop there after you harvest it. So mosh is an option, but it's it's not great in that way. In milder climates, you can do things like kales, brassicas, collards. That's what I meant. And spinach is an option. Lettuce is an option in some climates. But yeah, so if you have a way of protecting it, by all means, just grow food. Sure, there's no problem with that. Won't add as many benefits, and then of course you could be doubling up on your crop rotation a little bit. But yeah, I see no issue with that. McKenna and Andrew Fox write, is it acceptable to use duck pond water as a compost tea? Any do's and don'ts? I wouldn't use it as a tea. I mean, if you're not spraying stuff that's... I wouldn't spray anything you're going to eat with duck pond water. If you wanted to spray like a pasture, or if you wanted to spray like the soil before you plant something, maybe. It's just you're talking about a high level of contamination there. And in terms of like if you're eating, and even for yourself, like just you got to be a little bit careful with those things. Now, if you were putting it directly on the soil and it's not touching the plants and you're eating it yourself, that food yourself, not necessarily. I don't have a problem with it. I would probably for me, I would probably mix it in with my compost because it's certainly loaded with nutrients. But I probably would not put it directly on any crop that I plan to eat or eat from. Maybe tomatoes when they're super young, if they're for yourself, that would probably be okay. But you're just... especially when you're selling food, food safety is paramount. Like you just have to care and think about those things because you do not want to get anybody sick. But it's an unused resource like that. It could be great for certain things, especially like now as a cover crop option to pour some of that over a cover crop and let the cover crop sort of digest it and turn it into plant matter, and then it'll die, and then in the spring you can basically reutilize that or something like that. I see potential for it, just nothing that I'm going to eat directly. Yeah. Lamb's Quarters Farm asks question: popcorn. I'm a bit intimidated on the drying process, getting the moisture right. Any tips? Also, have you done a favorite variety? I'm thinking Robust 997. Robust is the one that I think we've had the best luck with. We've tried several over the years. I've tried some of the, what's the one? Tap Dancer. There's a few others. I'd have to look and see what they are. I don't know offhand. But honestly, those hybrids are the ones that have generally worked for us. And as far as drying it perfectly, there's probably like a tool that you could use to measure the moisture. We dry it for about 3 weeks and then we shell it, put it in like closed containers, and then it usually pops. You can usually tell when you're at the right spot. Just go check a few, like take them into a pan, put a little bit of oil on the bottom of the pan, put a few of the corn in the bottom of that pan, put a lid on, let it steam for a minute. If it pops nice, and then take those out and you see how they look. If they pop nice, then you're good to go. If not, leave it for a little longer to dry further. That is kind of a challenge, but yeah, usually just a few weeks and you're good. After it, like let it dry down as much as you can on the stalk and then take it in. Like we've already taken our popcorn in, and it's October 1st. So we usually take it in mid-September and then let it dry a little bit more. But yeah, not too, I try not to overthink that one. But yeah, there's probably also, if you're trying to sell it on a big scale, you would definitely want a way of measuring that moisture so you get it exact. For us, we're usually like selling a small amount and then eating a lot of it because it's the popcorn, as my children call it, which I think is kind of genius. They, chip off the old block, those kids. Angel Petov asks, hi from Bulgarik. Question, is that Bulgaria? Bulgaria. Question for strawberry. I have a verticillium, and I don't know how to remove it without killing all the other good microorganisms. Any suggestions? I don't have a great suggestion. I mean, part of it is, I wonder if they're in a tunnel. Like, are you getting it? It's not one I know a ton about. I think, honestly, your best bet is, certainly moisture and airflow are going to be important. Like maybe you're planting them a little bit too close. Maybe it's in a tunnel and it's not getting the air movement it needs. So maybe you need some sort of ventilation. If it's out in a field, you need to look for varieties that are resistant to verticillium. You need to make sure that your spacing is pretty good. Make sure that your soil health is up to it, up to a good standard. Maybe it would require a little bit of pruning but yeah, there's, and there are probably some sprays. I don't know in terms of what you would use for organic sprays for verticillium, but yeah, that's tough. Some of those fruit diseases, just depending on where you are, and I don't know what the climate is like there, but that can be a challenge. I wish I had a better answer for you. That one's a little bit tough for me because we don't have that issue, or we haven't had it yet on strawberries. A lot of that stuff comes down to airflow. And then in others too, if you all have addition additional things to add to this, feel free. Make sure to be reading through that comment section to find any updates. But yeah, I hope that's at least a little bit helpful, Angel or Anhil. Jessica Hallman writes, Jesse, hey, it's Jess. I love all my Jessies here. Would love to hear about how successful you think food forest and more integrated food systems can be for feeding large groups of people or even provide for a whole community. I mean, I think there's something to it, right? Like this whole country was like a giant food forest before colonization. But it was, thoughtful, and it has to be done right. You still have to think about things like proteins and carbohydrates and all the things that you need for successful food. I think there's a lot of value in trees in terms of carbon sequestration and shade and all the things that they provide, habitat for birds and insects. And if you're integrating nuts and things that are native to your area or will thrive in your ecosystem and your ecology, then I think there's a place for them for sure. I also think it's just like the Sumi Stoker, right? It's just a tool in the toolbox. You also need some amount of vegetable production. You need some amount of probably some animals involved somewhere. I think, but there's certainly potential there. One of the things that I worry about with food system design like that is not thinking through the management, the harvesting, because what happens sometimes is that people plant a bunch of one fruit and then they don't really have a system for how they're going to manage it. So a lot of the fruit just ends up rotting and going to waste. So that part has to be planned as well when it comes to, integrating these food forest systems. I think it's great. I think we need we need more, polyculture systems, but they have to be thoughtful. They also have to be thought in terms of caloric, right? If you're trying to feed people need calories. So it can't just be apples. It has to be everything else. It has to be nuts. It has to be things that people can utilize too. Maybe it's fibers. Maybe it's, things for mushroom production, like coppicing trees for mushroom production, for shiitakes and that sort of thing. Flowers, all sorts of stuff. Olives, all the things. It just depends on where you live. There's. It's not something I write off. I think it's a cool thing, and we have lots of trees, and we've been putting in more trees. There's a lot of potential there for sure. I don't think it's like a replacement for agriculture necessarily, right? But I think I think it should be involved more in agriculture. Yeah, good question. Tanner McKee Truther writes, how tolerant to mild shade is garlic? I have a plot that in the winter gets a bit more shade in the fall, spring that I was planning to put some garlic, but I wasn't sure if it was an ideal spot. I mean, ideally you get full sun for garlic. Honestly, it's a pretty sun hungry crop. I think it chose the winter as it's time to grow, sort of, because that's when there's not a lot of leaves on the trees and nothing else is trying to compete with it. So coming into the spring, it wants to be ready to really bolt, to really go rather. Ideally, it has full sun. A little bit of shade would probably be okay, but I think you're going to end up with smaller bulbs and longer plants if it's too much shade. A small amount you could probably get away with, or maybe you start to develop that garlic to be tolerant of a little bit of shade. It'll probably do fine, but it'll probably, as long as you don't have shade over the winter, it's just that it will probably be a little bit smaller in the spring when you harvest. That would be my guess, but it's hard to say. It just depends on what mild means to you, or what mild means to the garlic in terms of the amount of shade. Good question, though. Yeah, interesting. Delights of the Earth asks, what are your thoughts on composting squash vines and leaves infected with powdery mildew? Go Baggies. All right, so let me think. My thoughts on composting those. If you're good at composting, there should be no issue. It has to be composted at hot composting temperatures, turned so that all of those leaves get incorporated. It has to have the right moisture levels, and it has to have a good curing process. And in theory, you should not have any issues with any sort of transmission. However, It's not, a lot of people won't do that, and probably for good reason, because it could infect your crops, especially if you plan to use that particular compost where you're growing squash, or in your soil mixes or whatever where squash might be grown. For me, I would probably not, do it unless I felt confident in my composting. That's, just something you don't necessarily want to risk. So yeah, unless you feel really confident, I would probably avoid using infected leaves. We'll do it with, some of our tomato plants at the end of the season, like whether they're, look like they could be infected or not, I'll throw them in there, but I won't use that pile for tomatoes, if that makes sense. I won't put it anywhere I plan to put tomatoes in the next year. So I don't know. That's how I would manage it. It's not worth risking it, but if you feel really confident in your compost production, like some people do, like they have a really good composting system, then I don't necessarily think it's going to be a bad idea. It's just it's maybe the responsible thing is to avoid it. Good question though. Sylvia Dunham writes, I wish I could make this larger. Anyway, what's the go-to for when you have rutabaga collard and turnips going, but they're quite literally frozen and won't do anything? Yeah, I mean, they're not going to grow if they're frozen, right? So they're going to need to thaw. I would cover them if you want them to grow anymore. I'm going to guess that probably went in a little bit late for those crops. Collards are really slow. Rutabagas are really slow. Turnips, if they're Hakurei turnips, they're fast. But if they're the larger turnips, they're probably, probably needed to be planted a little bit early. Like if you're talking about really small plants, and they're getting frozen regularly, they're probably not gonna, really, really size up. You want to size those up going into the winter so that way, once they start to get those freezes, they really sweeten up. And then collards, once they get hammered several times with the freeze or frost, the cell walls tend to break down and it becomes like mushy. Same thing with turnip greens and same thing with rutabagas and that sort of stuff. But the rutabagas are nice because they just get sweeter. But you want to get those like rutabagas especially. That I think the last time we grew rutabagas, it's like 100-day crop or something. Really delicious, but you got to plant those in like here, at least in Kentucky, Zone 6B. We got to plant those in like July. Collards, we got to get started in July. Turnips, like the big, turnips with the turnip greens, like we got to start those in like latest August, just to get them to the size of a good sized turnip, but also good turnip greens. Cause that's a lot of times, honestly, when we're talking about turnips, people ask more for the turnip greens, less especially the locals, than they do for the actual turnip. So, yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. If they're small and they're getting frozen, they may not amount to much at this year, unfortunately. Bike Nanigans, that's fun to say. Re-pH. I tested my raised bed, community garden beds. I used a probe tester. After adding new soil mix, tested low 4s, mix of compost, coconut coir, vermiculite. How to raise lime. Why is mix so acidic? I don't know. I mean, mix shouldn't be super acidic. Just depends on the mix. The raised, if you're buying a raised bed mix and it's coming in acidic, that's a little strange. Like that should be balanced already when it arrives. It could be a water thing. Depends on what you maybe worth testing your water. That could have adjusted your acidity levels. Lime would be the answer, but I mean that in growing crops, just making sure that they're helping mitigate that acidity level. A good cover crop can help, but I suspect there may be something else going on there, because most raised bed mixes are already going to be balanced for pH. If they're not, it's worth checking. It may even be worth checking in with whoever you bought that from and just being like, hey, what's up with this? Have you had anybody else have any issues with pH? Let's see. Oh, and they said, this is a PS on that one. It's a veg garden with lime. I have to dig in. Anything I can do that is no dig, aka liquid. There may be some liquid options for that. I'm not 100% sure on that. I don't mess with the pH very much. Usually for me, it's I know it's super annoying that I'm always just like, it's compost and cover crops, but like that's how I manage most of these issues. And it, like the plants have ways of managing the pH. And if it's really, really bad, that's just something else. Like it's usually, like some amendment you've added, or the water that you're using or whatever is adjusting that pH one heavy direction or another. So not really, but you can start working that lime maybe into your soil mixes. That may help, like mix a little bit of extra lime into your soil mix. That could be an option of getting it into the soil without having to work it up. Or just, if you're slowly like breaking up compaction a little bit, just like lightly working it in. Don't pour it all, like don't pour the, recommended amount all in one time and try and work it in. Just like put a little bit on top, maybe broad fork it just to open up that compaction if there's any, a little bit, and then that'll help work some of that lime in. But you could even add a little bit with a seeder or something just to get it below the surface. But those, and like I said, you may like want to test that water and just to make sure. Quick water break here. Oops, spilled some water on my keyboard. That's good. Let's see. I'm going to get back to you, McKenna and Andrew, because I'm going to get to make sure I get to everybody a little bit. Nick and Brittany Fuller, right? We're growing popcorn for the first time and we got cornworms. Any recommendations to reduce cornworms next year? Really healthy soil is the only thing I've found to like reduce that. I mean, we don't get them super bad. But yeah, we'll occasionally get corn, especially in our sweet corn, usually not our popcorn. Also, I think there's a timing thing with that. It depends. If you plant them too early, I feel like you get them more than if you plant them a little bit later. Like if you're growing popcorn and you can manage a couple weeks later, I want to say that their life cycle, I don't know that I'm just, usually I do research for these things, but in this case, I think that their life cycle favors some of those early plantings rather than the late ones. So if you can hold off for a couple weeks before planting it to whatever you did this year, that would probably help, just to break up that life cycle a little bit and let them go find other people's corn. And then, soil health makes a huge difference. Like if they're just, lively, and I don't know what sort of natural predators they have. That would be a good one. That may be I may even write that one down for a future episode because it'd be good to look into some of those things because that's not one that we've been asked about. Look at me writing it down. All right, let's see. I know that's not super helpful, but maybe I can be more helpful in the future. MJ, definitely Michael Jordan, writes, planning to cure sweet potatoes on a tarped off open porch under a tarp. Any tips? Just south of Kentucky and Gainesboro, Tennessee. Thanks in advance. Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, it depends on how cool your nights are getting, though. As long as it stays out of the elements, right? And you should have plenty of humidity down there. We certainly have it up here. I don't see any problem with that. I would keep it under, I don't know if a tarp makes the most sense. I would probably put it under blankets. And that way it just has a little breathability, but that should be fine. If you're getting down in the 50s at night, like that's what we've got coming up. This next week is hot. It's a little over the heat, but next week, like the following week, looks like those temperatures are going to cool off. So when you're starting to get down into the 50s and stuff, they're not going to stay as warm. It may be worth, you said it was tarped off. Like if they could be in the sun a little bit during the day just to warm that area, that would help. But it's got to be, like I said, you want it above 75 degrees, ideally for the whole time it's curing. I think they generally recommend closer to 80 or 85 degrees for the curing process. But that, just the cooler it is, the longer it'll take. So it may take a couple extra weeks. Like we have a spot that we've been keeping them. It's probably in the high 70s for this one. We have this closet where I started taking some out recently and we ate some yesterday and they're like almost cured after about 2 weeks. And I could tell like they probably needed another week. So that's just something to think about. It just may take a little bit longer. Yeah. Love sweet potatoes. I cannot wait. We harvested some yesterday and they were beautiful. Like we didn't harvest a bunch, but I was worried about, like I've mentioned that I've been worried about the rodent issue, and we harvested some yesterday and they look amazing. After that rain, they just like really popped to life and I didn't see a lot of rodent damage. I don't know what happened. Maybe they just ate the ones they were eating finally instead of just nibbling on them. I don't know why they do that. But yeah, anyway, they look great and I'm feeling much better about our sweet potato situation. I was getting a little worried there. I think like the drought drew all the animals in to where the water was, which just happened to be in our sweet potatoes. So not my favorite thing, but I do dry farm those. So maybe that's a little bit on me. Gabriel B writes, hey Jesse, do you guys do any sap testing this year? No, I mean, sap testing can be really accurate. But it's tough for us on what we're doing because we're doing so few plants that it would make sense for. Our cherry tomatoes, maybe, but like 9 times out of 10, I can fix whatever issue I'm having with just like adding, some compost tea or a nice compost, working it in just like lightly around that plant. And I just really, when you're getting into the levels of doing like sap analyses and that sort of stuff, like you are at a high level already. Like you're worried about getting a handful more pounds per square foot or per, bed than, like your average grower. Because what you're talking about are usually like $60 analyses plus the amendments and all that stuff. Like, do you have another $100 to invest into that crop? Also, like the time that it's going to take the analysis, send it off, all the, going to the post office, doing all the things. By the time you're done, like you've put $100 into that test. So it better pay back 10 times that, right? And 9 times out of 10, it's not, unless it's like a huge crop that you're doing a whole tunnel of tomatoes, sure. If you're doing like, a whole field of apples or something, go for it. But like if you're just doing like a bed of cherry tomatoes and a bed of cucumbers or whatever, then I have a hard time justifying it, but other people can and other people do, but you really, really have to maximize that space. If you have to really, really maximize that space, then I think it's worth it. But yeah, it's a little bit harder to justify. No, we don't do it. If, like I said, if we really, really wanted to push our space, if I wanted to stop doing the show and do nothing but like do my farming, then yeah, I would probably, start looking into doing more sap analyses. Delights of the Earth asks, have you ever tried eating a sunflower head? Do you like it? I have not. I like sunflower seeds. I just ate some the other day. They were delicious out of our milpa patch. I've not tried that. I have no issue necessarily with it. We eat sunflower shoots. I like the sunflower seeds. So yeah, I'm all for the sunflower plant. It's a very, very, very good crop. And it's a lot of fun to grow too. And it's very pretty. The birds love it. I love my goldfinches. That's like my favorite thing that the sunflowers do for me, is bring in my favorite little bird that flies like a dolphin. Jamie Martin asks, I'm going to prep my garden for next spring. Usually I plant cover crops, but I really need them open so I can go ahead and put compost mulch down. What else would you do? What else would you might put down? Yeah, I mean, I think like any sort of mulches is probably the answer there. Or like we were talking earlier, doing a winter crop, that could be the other option. That's like a better like way of utilizing that space that's not going to be in the way necessarily in the spring. You just have to cut it out when you're done. Yeah, I mean, that's good. I'm glad that you're thinking that way, because it doesn't always make sense to cover crop for every bed, for every situation. So yeah, I think that's a good compost is a great way to do it. Sometimes if you get heavy rains, it's good to just make sure that compost is locked down some way. So, burlap or, even cardboard or something cardboard's not going to work, but something over top of it that's going to keep it from washing away, because you don't want to put all that compost down, have it wash away, and in the spring you don't have any mulch or compost. And then you're like, well, that's a bummer. So yeah, just any way you can lock that down, whether it's a tarp or it's a, landscape fabric or maybe burlap or something. That could be, the only addition I would add there, just to make sure it stays in place. Hay, straw, whatever you use for that area, with the obvious caveats of hay and straw with weed seeds, or potentially chemicals or whatever else you may be dealing with in that situation. Super chat from Proper Skyfet. Shouts to you. Fall sugar snap tips, trying on your rec zone 10A. Yeah, I mean, if you plant them early enough and you harvest them before those hard freezes come, you're in 10A, you should be fine. Yeah, I mean, just grow them until they're ready to harvest and eat them. They're going to be delicious. Once it starts to get cold, a little bit cold there, 10A, maybe it doesn't get that cold. Yeah, they should be delicious. There's, make sure that you're trellising if need be and do all the normal pea things, but you should be good to go. I wonder if you're having any if you're having any specific issues, though, let me know, because I can try and address them specifically. But yeah, you plant them. You probably can still plant in 10A. You could probably still plant them. I don't know how low you get there, but I'm going to assume you barely get below freezing. And really, like, the pods you don't want to freeze, obviously, but like light frosts on those plants, even if they have a few flowers, the flowers may die, but even if they have a few flowers, a light frost, they should be able to get through that. So yeah, that would be cool. Let us know how that goes, because I'd be curious to know how long you can grow those into the winter there, because you may just be able to harvest stuff from all winter. I don't know. Jacob Garcer Kuba G95 from hi from Czech Republic, Zone 8B. Hi to the Czech Republic. For me, it's time for planting onions and mowing cover crop and preparing place for garlic. Do you have experience how these plants can handle some cover crop that survive? I wouldn't put, like we talked about the cover cropping with garlic recently. I would not put a winter hardy cover crop in with my garlic. You can put a winter kill cover crop like peas. If you're an 8B, you could probably still get away with that. You want it to grow pretty tall and then die. But if you're going to plant it very much later, I would not put one in with my garlic. It just will survive all winter and it will be a pain to deal with in the spring. Onions, same thing. For those of you who can grow Walla Wallas, like planting them now and then harvesting in the spring, you definitely wouldn't want to plant them with a winter hardy cover crop because onions, alliums in particular, that whole family does not do well with, that sort of thing. So yeah, make sure to get those planted. Okay, so let's see. Super chat above. Okay. I've got a couple more questions here, and then we may have to call it because it's at 9:50. I do about an hour. Let's see. Brad Liston writes, no-till growers, how are you saving your watermelon juice from this year, Jesse? I usually just freeze it. What I do is I freeze it in like Tupperware containers. And then in this when I want to use it, I put it in the fridge. It takes a few days for it to thaw. It'll separate, and then I'll have to shake it every time I want to use it, which is kind of frustrating. I've also saved it in like popsicle form. It is way too intense in popsicle form. So if you're going to do that, you may want to mix it with something else. Love my watermelon juice though. It's like my favorite thing. I look forward to, I'm like ready for the season to be done so I can justify starting in on it. But I did a fair amount. I did it all from those, not all of it. I think I had one or two like normal watermelons that I used that were like busted and weren't going to be good for selling, or giving to people, which I mostly just give our watermelons to our neighbors as a thank you for being our neighbors and putting up with, having this wild farm next door. But the pollinator melons, those are the ones I usually use. And that, it's been great. I can't wait to break into it now I'm thirsty for it. Thank you for doing that. And we'll see how I get through the rest of the day without doing that. Melissa Campbell writes, how close can I put a silage tarp around 2-year-old trees, mostly fig and plum? We planted without killing grass and now regretting it. Garden is fully tarped to start next year, 8B coastal in North Carolina. You can just don't put it right up against the plants, and also make sure it's really well weighted down because the tarps are like, I have some, you maybe saw a picture of it. I have it out towards this area that I'm wanting to tarp and plant some potatoes in next year. So what you don't want is those tarps like blowing on and breaking your trees, right? Because they're very heavy. So you want to make sure it is locked down. As long as it's not touching the actual base of the tree, maybe give yourself like a nice 8-inch diameter around the tree and then use wood chips or something, like pull that grass around, put some wood chips down or something to kind of lock it in place. But as long as it's not touching the tree, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. Ideally in the spring, that grass will die back and you can like maybe even take like some cardboard, cut a hole in it, put that down, and then put some wood chips or something around that just to like mulch that area and keep those weeds from coming up too badly. I remember Jenny Love, my buddy Jenny Love, was saying she did a weed dating party at her thing where she would have like wine and people would come out and they would just sit there and like help her weed around like mulched areas, like all of her perennials, which I thought was fun. So maybe that's a business option for some of you. Brett Schrom asks, does squash bug damage indicate nutrition deficiency in the squash plant? Potentially, yeah. It could potentially just mean the plant's not getting what it needs to protect itself, right? Like plants create, different chemicals to protect themselves, and if they don't have access to the nutrients they need, they can't do those chemicals. So sometimes it could be nutrients, it could be water, it could be the timing of the crop, it could be sometimes some of these plants are bred in, like we grow in, I've talked about like our garlic, for instance. Some of these plants are bred in areas where it is drier than where we are, that does not have the same pest pressure. So when we plant them here, the plant is like, oh wait, hold on. So it needs everything it can possibly get to really, to develop, and to defend itself, frankly. So, that's could be a number of things too. Like timing does matter. Like when you plant the plant, and trying not to. A lot of the squash bug damage that I see is from the earlier plantings. So we usually not tarp those. We usually insect net those. Through some sort of exclusion netting until they start flowering, and then we take it off, and that helps. For the later stuff, as long as it has good nutrition, right? Like a squash, like winter squashes and stuff, loves compost. It just really needs a lot of it. So it needs a lot of good nitrogen. It needs access to all the nutrients and a lot of good moisture just right at the right times. Get it well watered in, and it can take care of itself through a drought. Like it has those big leaves to help hold that moisture in, but it does need a little bit of something. It's not necessarily a deficiency in the plant that it's showing, but it could, it does indicate it doesn't have something it needs. Okay, here's a good one to end on. Joy of the Garden and Home asks, how do you come up with your weekly stories? These are completely, I have no idea. And I kind of come up with them just on the fly. And I don't know. I have always loved fiction. I've always loved, coming up with stories and telling stories. And I've never really had a desire to like write a fictional book necessarily. Like I've had a desire, but never really, it's not something I feel like I was really adroit at, but I like telling stories. I love just kind of coming up with these stories on the fly. I like seeing how they evolve. Sometimes you probably can guess this. Sometimes I don't totally know how they're going to end when I start them, or even like by the last day, I'm kind of coming up with, and sometimes that like creates these really amazing moments where I'm like, oh, that is exactly how this story should have ended. And then sometimes I'm like, man, that was okay. But I've enjoyed that. I hope that you all enjoy those just as like something different to the show, because I know from listening to a lot of daily shows that I don't always need the Daily Show to be about what the Daily Show is about, right? Like a lot of sports shows, like I listen to Kentucky Sports Radio every day, love that show. One of my favorite things about it though, and they will talk about this too, is that they don't always just stay on topic. Like they will talk about random stuff. They'll talk about, like different sports. They'll talk about stuff that doesn't have anything to do with Kentucky. Not all of it I care about, but I appreciate that it's not always just like this unrelenting 2-hour overload of Kentucky sports, right? Like sometimes it is, like I said, it could be about driving. It could be about standing in lines. It could be about all sorts of stuff. And I want to have an element of that to this show without making it too little about farming, without making it too much about farming. So I try to have a little bit of diversity there, just because sometimes you just get in these rhythms and you're listening to these shows and it's fun to just have people to hang out with. And I want to make sure to kind of continue in on that. I think that's kind of it. I thought those weekly stories, they kind of developed organically from, getting all these awesome Patreon members and all their unique names. And and you all did it. You all started it. So you all can enjoy that. So anyway, I think we're going to wrap it there. Let me do my end of the episode spiel. Thank you all so much for coming. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. Like the video, that helps. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, and everybody that's submitted their theme music this past month. We've even got one more for tomorrow, so you can keep them coming. I don't mind that. I think that's fun. Anyway, thank you for those. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and whatever the role is, whatever you want to call your title today, Mike, over there helping me with the questions. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music. Oh, I already did that part. Pick up a hat, one of these. I've got these beanies and stuff too. Mike had never heard the word toboggan. Also a toboggan, or a boggin as we call them. You can pick those up at notillgrowers.com, or you can pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook there as well to support our work. Big thank you to everyone at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of now, October, you get a shout on the show, but not today. We will do that. We will continue our shout outs tomorrow when I'm not forced to do a live and screw up the masterful narratives I put together, obviously. Otherwise, thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.